I guess this isn't really as much of a response video as like a yes and video, to use the first rule of improv. I'm responding to a video I like, and just have some extra points I want to bring up and talk about from my perspective as a speech language pathologist. Let's go! Woo! Pew, 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 pew! Hello and welcome to the Trauma-Informed SLP. I am Kim Neely. I am a neuroqueer person and a licensed speech language pathologist in the United States. And on this channel, I use my knowledge from my training as an SLP and also my personal experiences and also all the additional trauma-informed training I've received over the past few years and the hyperfixation on it to examine like human connection and communication and to kind of unpack all the stuff so that hopefully we can come to a more compassionate and understanding place with everybody. That was not how I wanted to say that. Basically, I want to promote understanding, compassion, and healing. That's what I'm here for. So, the YouTube channel, I'm Autistic Now What, just put out a video. I believe, according to Reddit, I believe her name is Meg. She recently put out this video called TikTok Has an Autism Mom Problem. And I'll put a link below to the video and also to her channel because I really do appreciate, I think she brings a lot of smart and well-researched perspectives to her videos. And she's also like incredibly sweet. Where I am sassy and blunt, she is very, very sweet. Perhaps she is sassy and blunt in her private life, but sometimes I can't mask that even in videos, and she can. So I highly respect that if you are sassy and blunt. Being autistic, I'm sure there's a bit of bluntness in there, you know? I'm sure. So she put out this video basically talking about I believe they're self-identified autism moms, and it is a source of contention in the autistic community. And I think who I believe is Meg brought up really great points, but I think I just have a few things I just wanted to add. So I'm just yes-anding the video here as my response. I'm going to pick a few key points and we're going to go on about it. But basically this is sort of a response video, but in the yes and format. I'll go ahead and let her introduce the topic for you. And then I might actually jump ahead to one of the moms to address a certain thing because there's a word I'm going to use a lot that she has an issue with. And I just wanted to clarify that right off the jump. And then I'll dial it back. I have a few points marked that I wanted to talk about. So here we go.
I feel like the online autistic community is in trouble. If you heard RFK Jr.'s recent press conference, you might think there's no way anyone who cares about autistic people could agree with that man, but you would be wrong. While researching for my Love on the Spectrum video, I discovered at least a couple of the parents of cast members had reposted TikToks from mainly other parents in support of RFK. Why is the online autism community so divided? Why are this man's words resonating with anyone? What is going on? And in case you missed it, I already have a 1 hour, 14-minute long video where I went through RFK's press conference in excruciating detail.
Which also, honestly, I'm Autistic Now What? That's why I love your channel. I love those deep dives. I really respect looking up those studies. Like, that is the vibe I am after. I love that. So, thank you. I believe, Meg. But thank you for doing a deep dive because I don't think I would have the time nor the patience. That's pretty awesome.
She calls neurospicy and neurodivergent self-diagnosed words.
I'll tell you what I don't accept right off the bat. The words neurospicy and neurodivergent. Those are self-diagnosed words, clearly. Since people are thinking that it's cute to say that they have a touch of autism, then they clearly are not aware of jack shit. Those are self-diagnosed words that are like spitting directly in the face of human beings like my daughter.
Okay, so I use the word neurodivergent a lot. So I want to clarify. Neurodivergent is not a synonym for autism. Those two words are not synonyms. They do not mean the exact same thing. Neurodivergent is an umbrella term. It is a term that literally means any divergence away from how we expect a brain to be wired, which translates to people dealing with just neurological differences, and it affects how they interact with the world, how they perceive themselves in the world, the choices they make, the behaviors. All of this stuff is impacted by our brain, right? Because our brain's in charge of all that stuff. So when people have studied human cognition and human brain capabilities, okay, you could kind of lay all of that under a bell curve. You could take all that data and slap it under a bell curve and say, yeah, most of humanity fits here. This is their capability. This is where humans, this is the limitation of their memory and their ability to plan and organize and stuff. All this stuff falls here, right? And then there's people who fall on the outside of that bell curve. And the people who fall on the outside of that bell curve are the neurodivergents. We're the ones whose brains are just wired differently. That's the intention of that word, is just to say neurodivergency is the term that says everybody's brain is a little different, which is 100% true because we wouldn't be individuals if our brains were all the same. Okay? It would be like a Star Trek episode with clones instead or whatever. Didn't they have one like that? Where it was like everybody was kind of the same person or something. Anyway, if we didn't have different brains, we wouldn't be individuals, is my point. But when you're looking at how society is structured and how society is expected to run and the kind of abilities humans are expected to have within that society, some of us will never fall in line. Some of our brains are just built different enough that we're never going to fall in line with that expectation, okay? So neurodivergent is an umbrella term. It includes autism, but it also includes ADHD, dyslexia, all of that, dyscalculia, those things. And it also includes genetic syndromes. Down syndrome is a neurodivergency. You could also have acquired neurodivergencies. You could have a traumatic brain injury that changes how your brain functions, and that would be an acquired neurodivergency. And there are children who have brain injuries from either at birth or slightly prior to birth. If there was a lack of oxygen during birth, if they lost access to oxygen at any time in the womb, they might have a brain injury. There are mental health issues that are considered neurodivergencies, like depression, anxiety, like OCD, especially really severe anxiety conditions, personality disorders, schizophrenia. Like these things are all divergencies. They are things that diverge from what we expect the average healthy human brain to do and how we expect that brain to function. So the fact that you refuse to acknowledge the word neurodivergency, it is not a self-diagnosis term. It's actually a term used by researchers a lot. It's been adopted by medical professionals now because it's an incredibly useful term to talk about people who have brain differences. It's extremely useful to have a category to put people under to talk about these things. And by you denying that term as being a useful term, and plus also a community-driven, like we can find each other kind of term out online, you're denying the existence of all those other neurodivergents. You're saying autism is the only neurodivergency that matters, and everybody who says they're neurodivergent is saying they're autistic, and I don't accept that. That's a very interesting take. I'm not saying your feelings are necessarily invalid about it. I'm sure they're coming from a place of a lot of burnout and upset and difficult things that you're dealing with, but neurodivergency is a very useful term. Now, when it comes to touch of autism and neurospicy, these are within the neurodivergent community terms. These are terms that ADHDers, autistics, those two are the ones who tend to come up the most under social media algorithms because they're the hottest topic these days. Those are within community terms. Now, every time you have a community that is built around common, shared, adverse experiences, those communities tend to develop ways to make light of things, to bring some levity to things, and to just have a little fun with our identities in just like kind of a safe environment with each other, okay? There are people within the community who don't like those terms. They find them kind of infantilizing. But there are others who just think they're kind of fun. I'm a little burnt out on neurospicy as a term, I will say. I really liked it at first, though, because look, there was something tickling my brain. It was just kind of amusing, the idea of describing brain function as a flavor profile. My brain found that fun. You know, it's a fun little wordplay. Touch of autism is just, I think that's just super fun to say. I don't know. I think it's a mouthfeel thing, a sensory thing for me, but it's alliteration and it's just fun. Okay. But essentially, it's the way, like, you know, if somebody is around and they're just talking about their autism, it's a way of them usually bringing up something that they've probably been made fun of or they've faced adversity for without having to, like, trauma dump about it. You know, it's like, I'm going to make a joke about my trauma. That's not how you want to introduce that joke. You know what I mean? You might just want to be like, oh, it must just be my autism acting up. You don't always want to be sitting there being like, my life is horrible all the time. Like, that's just not, most humans don't want to be in that place, okay? And neurodivergents are included, including autistics. Most people don't want to feel that way about themselves all the time, that everything is horrible. And you denying those terms as being useful, and you're assuming they have something to do with self-diagnosis. They don't have anything to do with self-diagnosis. They have something to do with connecting to community. That's what I wanted to say mainly about those particular terms, though. That was my main unpacking. Neurodivergent is an incredibly useful term and is not a synonym for autism. So the next little piece I just want to go back. I'm going to go back to like the 12-something minute mark, and I just wanted to add a few pieces to something that this lady says. Once again, I really do encourage you to watch the whole video. It's well done. It's a good video. Okay.
Did you see how fast everyone ran? Did you see them all run away? Every single person who says we're all one spectrum, we all have the same brain, we all have the same neurotype, we have your child's brain, we understand your children better than you do, because we all are alike. Did you see them run? They don't see themselves as our kids, like our kids. They're not like our kids. And they know it. Again, this isn't everybody. I always get accused of speaking for everybody. I'm not speaking about everybody. But there's a lot of people that ran. They're running from our children. They don't want to be associated with them. Do you see that?
She also has this other TikTok where she shares an image of her adult son with the words, trying to help my 34-year-old son with autism regulate while watching the battles over Kennedy's comments, laughing at how many of these disabled autistics, in quotation marks, are now bragging about how great their lives are, absolutely thriving with jobs, happily married, raising children, and most importantly, are paying taxes with a laughing face emoji. So in his press conference, RFK Jr. said that this new prevalence rate was a tragedy because these children will never pay taxes, will never play baseball, will never write a poem, etc., etc. And many autistic people were quick to point out that yes, I do pay taxes and list their achievements. Not a fan of the word bragging in her post when people were just trying to stick up for themselves in the wake of something that was very upsetting. He literally just called autism a preventable disease in such an offhand manner seconds before.
This is a preventable disease.
And the way she placed disabled autistics in quotation marks, as if both things can't be true. Of course, you can still be disabled and hit conventional markers of success. Disabled people can be married and have kids. However, is there a valid point buried if we dig quite deep? The knee-jerk reaction is just to be like, the hell is RFK talking about? Of course that's not true. And it shows a worrying lack of knowledge of the autistic spectrum and autistic people throughout history if RFK sincerely believes no autistic people have worked a job ever, because literally the first person to be diagnosed with autism did. And in this context, he's saying that to make the 1 in 31 children are autistic data seem super scary, scaring parents about the future destiny of their child, convincing mothers not to vaccinate. It makes sense to me that so many autistic people wanted to push back against that. However, I can see why responding with, well, I pay taxes, which I did, by the way. I did in that video. I made a list of autistic people who do pay taxes. It could feel like erasure to autistic people who don't pay taxes, who don't work for whatever reason. Many of us don't. To parents of high support needs autistic people, and create a dangerous Asperger's-like separation between the spectrum. If we say, oh, that doesn't describe me, it leaves room for people to respond with, well, it does describe them. RFK just wasn't talking about you. And then the community could be segregated, some autistic people labeled as lost causes, not useful to society, profoundly autistic. So yes, while some autistic people
Okay, so I might want to go back just to
taxes who don't work for whatever reason, many of us don't, to parents of high support needs autistic people, and create a dangerous Asperger's-like separation between the spectrum. If we say, oh, that doesn't describe me, it leaves room for people to respond with, well, it does describe them. RFK just wasn't talking about you. And then the community could be segregated, some autistic people labeled as lost causes, not useful to society, profoundly autistic. So yes, while some autistic people do pay taxes, people are not resources. RFK.
Exactly. That was the main thing I wanted to add on to. This is related to, I put out a bit of a response video. I don't know that it's necessarily one of my best videos out there, but I basically put in a video, I believe I titled it something about, like, don't argue the stats, right? Argue humanity, not stats, essentially. Because I did have a little bit, also it rubbed me a little bit funny how much people were coming out against, like, well, I have jobs, I have kids, I can do this stuff, I can do this stuff. And I can see why. I think one aspect of why that was appealing is I do think there are certain neurodivergencies, certain types of neurodivergence for whom, including myself, arguing facts helps. You know, it's like our minds get changed when people argue facts with us, when we learn something new. Some of us really love learning. That's part of our thing. We like hyperfixate and we deep dive and we learn new things and it shifts our perspective. And so sometimes I think we make the error in thinking that will help other people shift their perspective. So I think that might be one of the aspects as to why everybody jumped on that train. I think there was also the aspect that the 1 in 31 stats includes all diagnoses. It doesn't include levels. The 1 in 31 is not saying profound to severe autism. It's 1 in 30 just autism diagnoses across the board. If you're saying the 1 in 31 is all autistic diagnoses, then you're saying all autistics don't pay taxes and don't do this. So it's a reasonable and logical defense. But this is my point that I made in that video, which is instead of arguing the stats, the real core issue is the intense amount of dehumanization toward autistics and the infantilization of autistics, and also summarizing the worth of a human's life based off of contribution to society, specifically financial contribution. These are some really critical issues here because this is the exact same type of rhetoric that eugenicists used to force sterilizations, to force people into asylums. Like, this is where that stuff came from. And that's why when she mentioned the Asperger's classification, that is what Asperger was literally doing. He was judging who could be useful and who could not be useful. And the ones who were not useful, well, he was a Nazi. So I'll leave it up to you to determine what happened to them. It's not that helpful, right? It's not that helpful. Also, when it comes to support needs, when you're thinking of people who have high support needs as individuals, if they have high medical needs, support needs can change throughout someone's life. They might need higher support needs as a kid and a little bit less as an adult, right? Or vice versa. This is why this is a not useful thing. It's all couched in dehumanizing rhetoric.
The worth of a life should not be measured by someone's productivity. And all autistic people deserve to be protected from this man and this administration, especially higher support needs and lower masking autistic individuals who may be more likely to be discriminated against, to be dehumanized, and maybe more likely to be harmed by social service and community support cuts. So I think what we can take from this is that we can call out misinformation but still stand in solidarity with the whole spectrum. And we can't let this sort of pushback erase or invalidate lower support needs autistic people either. No one is hijacking autism.
Psst. Autism is being hijacked.
It's Autism Month. We'll be told that autism is just an identity.
It's just a difference, not a disability. Something to celebrate.
Because now, basic human traits are labeled as autism.
Feeling anxious? Autism.
Depressed? Autism.
Enjoy your alone time? Autism.
Twirl your hair? Autism.
No, you would not be diagnosed for any of these things alone, no matter what anyone says on TikTok.
This Autism Awareness Month, let's send a clear message. The autism spectrum has become so broad, it is meaningless.
I do not feel like the diagnosis is meaningless. People are hitting the diagnostic criteria. Autism is an invisible disability, and this sort of rhetoric could be harmful, could lead to services being denied to lower support needs autistic people, including the children. In the UK, we're trying to say that autism is overdiagnosed. We've got the epidemic in the US, we've got overdiagnosis in the UK. Nobody can make up their mind. It's both at the same time. I don't know. This is just a really bad look, and as someone connected to an autism organization, I'd expect a bit more professionalism.
Yeah. So one of the things I wanted to bring up with this is yes, autism, invisible disability. I like to use the terms apparent and non-apparent as disability indicators because not all disabilities are visual. You might have an apparent disability in the sense, for example, with RFK Jr., the way his voice sounds, spasmodic dysphonia, that would be an apparent disability. You can hear it, right? So non-apparent, there are non-apparent autistics and there are apparent autistics, okay? And I don't think anyone's saying it's not a disability. I have not heard that from anyone who's actually really, truly active in the neurodivergency movement, the advocacy groups, like the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network and organizations led by actual neurodivergents. No one's saying it's not a disability. So there's the social model disability. There's also the medical model of disability. More apparent autistics tend to fall under the medical model of disability in the sense that they do need access to extensive medical care and medical supports in order to access a certain quality of life and the highest level of independence they can achieve. That's usually the goal with that. Hi, this is Editing Kim. Sometimes when I'm recording this, I just end up sort of waffling around the actual point I'm trying to make, thanks to my neurodivergent brain. So I like to come on here later on and just kind of unwaffle my own thoughts for you all. You're going to probably hear from me again in a little bit, but anyway, here's what I wanted to say about this point of autism being an identity. The autism part can't really be separated from who the autistic is. Our neuronal wiring is what determines how we perceive, interpret, and behave in the world, right? And having different neuronal wiring, whether it's from like a traumatic brain injury or from a neurodevelopmental condition, it means a person is going to perceive, interpret, and act differently in the world. And yes, some of those differences can be hidden in some people. They can be masked, but they can't just be erased completely, right? So that is why autism is an identity, just as much as woman is an identity, just as much as mom is an identity, right? Because it can't really be separated from the person. And yes, autism is also a difference, and it is also a disorder. So autism being an identity, a difference, and a disorder are all things that can and actually are true at the same time. So we're always going to be a little weird, a little odd, a little off, and we're always going to struggle to be welcome into broader society and community with other people who are different from us if those people continue to not respect our differences, if they're going to continue to tease us and quite frankly emotionally abuse us, verbally abuse us for our differences, right? So that's the point of the differences, is like, stop abusing us for our differences, okay? Some of what we have is a disorder in the context of how society is structured, and some of us do have disorders in the sense of we need medical support. Yeah. And the whole point of a movement, the whole point of a community coming together to move towards some kind of equity and justice is for everyone to gain access to these kind of supports, for everyone to have an improved quality of life, including the caregivers of the significant support needs kids, right? We want everybody to have improved quality of life, everyone to have more support to help with the disabilities as they present themselves, while also having access to more people to be safe around, to not have to feel like you have to constantly hide and mask and have the negative mental health impacts. That's part of the difference discussion. I hope that makes some sense. Oh, hi, it's Editing Kim here again. I just wanted to clarify some of my thoughts on this autism being hijacked statement that this mom made. I actually have two responses. First, I have my sassy, pithy response, which is, yeah, autism is being hijacked by RFK Jr., who is using it as a dog whistle for the current regime's fascist agenda, which is the whole danger here. Okay, now my educational response here is more about the sense of identity and social adversity that people face across the board when it comes to different disabilities, neurodiversity, and yes, autistics. Now, I was raised in the white woman box here in the United States, and we white people really do have an issue with centralizing our own narratives, which Generation Z calls the main character syndrome, if you will. And I think some of these moms who are caregivers for higher support need autistics are very frustrated and just feel like their narrative isn't central, which therefore feels to them like no one is recognizing their position as a caregiver, the lack of support for caregivers, the lack of resources for them, and that, honestly, caregiver burnout is a very real and very big thing that has been studied across many different areas. And yeah, they are grossly undersupported by our system here in the United States. But here's the critical thing here. The autism acceptance movement is a social movement that is a subset of the neurodiversity movement, which itself is a subset of the larger disability movement that's been going on for longer than autism has even been a diagnosis. And these are all social movements that are led by, and therefore centralize the narrative of, the people that the movement is about. So for autism acceptance, that would be actual autistic people. And there are autistic advocates in that movement across the whole spectrum of support needs, including high support autistics, despite what your social media algorithms are feeding you constantly. And yes, advocating for more support and resources for caregivers is very much needed as well. But if these caregivers want their own narratives to be centralized, then what they really need is their own social movement as a subset of the autism acceptance movement, rather than, quite frankly, trying to kind of hijack the movement from the actual autistics who established it themselves. So at the end of the day, this whole autism acceptance movement is a giant, complex thing involving many complex issues and also involving many complex people with many different intersectionalities as well, including queer and people of color and all of that. And that means that many, many things can all be true at one time under this umbrella of the kind of adversity autistics and their caregivers face. But that does not mean that RFK Jr.'s mis- and quite frankly disinformation, in the sense of propaganda, is actually true. It is not true, and it is dangerous. The whole point is for all disabled people to have access to needed supports and needed financial support as well. That gets included in that, right? And also to not be discriminated against and put in asylums and all that too. Of course, we don't want that either.
We have to literally hide food from him. And also my grandma had to bolt down the refrigerator from him moving it constantly because she's like almost 80 years old and she can't move her fridge. You don't understand that. Like, he cannot wash himself. He can't do a lot of things by himself. And she will always have to do that for him. And when she passes away, that responsibility will fall onto me and my siblings to be able to take care of him. Sometimes my brother hits himself and hits other people, and he's very strong. He's a grown man.
I do get the impression that some people who care for higher support needs autistic individuals view content from lower support needs creators who have good on-camera communication skills, similarly to how many of us view neurotypical people who say, everyone's on the spectrum somewhere, we're all a little bit autistic. These days on TikTok, there is a lot of content from lower support needs autistic people, and these families don't feel like their experience and the autistic person they're supporting is represented by this content, and then are concerned that their experience is going to be drowned out, basically. There is a lot of misinformation about autism on TikTok, and there are well-meaning people who generalize their experience to the whole spectrum.
Yeah, so that is definitely, and that's kind of what I'm getting at in terms of like, families need way more support. What that lady was saying about her brother is exactly what I'm talking about. There are people who will need 24/7 care their whole life. They will have that advanced medical need, especially for hygiene, for washing themselves, that sort of stuff. Absolutely. And especially in the US, we do not have a good answer for what happens to the parent once the parent passes. What happens? Like, he has other siblings, it sounds like, who are prepared to take care of him. But for a lot of people, it means the kid ending up in like a community housing situation or like a nursing care situation, like a skilled nursing facility type of situation. And sometimes those facilities are not ethically the safest or the best for these people, right? And it's not a great answer. And it's a genuine fear. And Caregiver burnout is extremely real. Caregivers feeling trauma from all of this having to caregive 24/7 is very real. Their mental health needs are very real, and they don't get it. They don't get support for that at all, right? Their fears are extremely real and very much heartbreaking in how real it is and how little help there actually is to offer. Some places have more help than others, depends on like cities and states and that kind of funding and stuff. But this is something that like I said, historically, these are the kids who would have been put in places like Pennhurst Asylum, from a young age. They probably wouldn't have been home. And in fact, Robert F. Kennedy, he has an aunt who was hidden away for most of the family, due to whatever her condition was. We don't have a lot of good information about what her condition was prior to a certain medical procedure done because she was considered kind of shameful for the family to admit they have someone with intellectual disabilities and stuff in their family, okay? And whatever that diagnosis was. So there was that stigma around it, right? Where we just constantly hid these people and we put them in institutions. And then the institutions closed because of defunding and incredibly inhumane things happening there. And it was just happening out of sight, out of mind. And it wasn't until like an actual news report came out, I believe, about Pennhurst. That was one of the Suffer the Little Children, I think, the documentary in the 70s. That was one of the big driving forces to closing down these institutions, which is why now all that burden of care have fallen to the family members. And they don't get the right number of like medical providers who can come to the home and actually do the caregiving for the parent, that can actually help the parent with like keeping the installing the things for the refrigerator. Like there should be somebody coming to help with that. She shouldn't have to do that on her own as an 80-year-old. That should be something paid for by Medicaid and like these other programs that now our government wants to defund, right? But I think the bigger picture here, in my opinion, is you take these families under incredibly high stress, incredibly traumatic situations, have extreme caregiver burnout, and then you say, we could have a cure. The problem is you've taken a very emotionally vulnerable population and you've promised them something that will definitely not exist because this is a very complex situation that involves so many different people. But that's part of the grift, right? That's part of it's kind of like the honestly, alternative medicine sometimes does this too, but there are so many grifts out there based off of like, this one thing will cure it, this one thing will stop it, this one thing will fix the whole problem. And so then these really stressed out parents hang all their hopes on that one thing. And it's like, it's not actually productive in the long run, because even if there is a way to stop profound autism, even if we do away with vaccines and no more profound autism, which isn't going to happen because these people existed before vaccines happened. Because like I said, institutions, asylums, that's where they were. They still were being born. They just weren't being left at home. There was a cure for it, actually, now that I think about it, and during that time of institutions and asylums. And actually, Rosemary Kennedy received that cure. It was called a lobotomy. It did wonders at making incredibly compliant patients. Oh, man, you just scramble up the frontal lobe a bit and you can just leave somebody laying in bed all day. They won't do anything about it. Perfect. And actually, Rosemary Kennedy, what we do know is the lobotomy really impacted her. Like it caused more severe disabilities in her than she had before. She had it. Physical disabilities. So she was essentially institutionalized the rest of her life. So be cautious whenever anyone is trying to sell you a cure to something that is very complex and requires nuanced, individualized care. And even if we magically do away with autism and it suddenly disappears, which it will not, because historically they existed. I'm going to keep saying that. Historically, these people still existed. But even if, let's say that happens, okay, how is that going to help your kid now? What are we going to do with the 30-year-old son who still has significant medical support needs? How is that going to help in any sort of practical way? The truth is it's not. What actually will help is improved funding, improved support, mental health support for the family, additional caregiving support for the family, and ethical, answers for who does the caregiving if something happens to the parents. We need ethical, morally just answers for that. And we don't. So if all that anger and frustration was just directed that way, maybe we could get some things done. But directing it toward a cure and following along with someone who's literally echoing the same rhetoric as eugenicist, his rhetoric has an extreme echo of, let's go back to the past. And the past was not a good place. You do not want your child living back then. I promise you, you do not.
Again, with almost 800 likes, with an all caps, and does destroy families at the end of it.
There's also like abuse and neglect that destroys families, and extreme misogyny destroys families. And there's a lot of things that destroy families. Plenty of families get destroyed without any autism existing in that family. So...
And I keep seeing this pattern. Videos from doctors, advocates, self-identified autistic folks, caregivers, parents, talking about all the amazing things autistic people are doing. And listen, truly beautiful, deserves to be celebrated. Progress, representation, I love all of it. My kids are autistic, I get it. But then they toss in a line like, well, yeah, of course there are high support individuals too, and yeah, they deserve dignity and respect, of course. Okay. Well, what does dignity and respect actually look like for those families?
It looks like crafted, individualized care with an entire medical team and caregiving team, including the parents, including the child, including all the therapists, the medical doctors, everybody collaborating together to provide this person with the highest level of supports that allows them to attain the highest level of independence in life and the best quality of life possible. That is what respect and dignity looks like. That is the biopsychosocial model of medicine. That is the model that is the best practice of medicine. Quite frankly, trauma-informed care is part of that biopsychosocial model. You consider the biological factors, the medical factors that are preventing them from accessing certain things in life. You consider the social needs of the family and the patient. And you consider the psychology, the mental health of the family, the patient, and just in general, the broader cultural structure that they live in. And you make decisions, wise, informed, collaborative decisions as a team to provide the very highest quality of life possible for not just the patient, for the family. The reason this doesn't happen very often in the United States is because insurance and the socialized medicine known as Medicaid doesn't want to pay for it. And there is an extreme disparity. More well-off families can pay out of pocket for this type of care, for this extremely high level of care. But if you are poor, if you are living below the poverty line, if you are people of color, if you are immigrants, it is unlikely you will actually be able to access the level of care needed to provide the dignity and respect. But that is what it looks like. It does not look like a cure. It looks like ongoing, flexible, wise, collaborative decisions made across the entire team, and it also takes into consideration the psychology and the viewpoints and the desires of the patient themselves. And yes, non-speakers can also be part of this collaboration because non-speakers do have thoughts. Just because they can't talk doesn't mean they can't communicate. It doesn't mean they can't access language if given the right alternative and augmentative communication device, AAC, augmentative alternative, I believe I flipped those words, but AAC device, if they're provided the right methodology to access language, they also should be included in these caregiving decisions and the type of care that they deserve as a human. Period. That is what it looks like. If you're asking.
I don't think it looks like the comment sections I've seen all day.
Yeah, respectful dignity things, I would never look at a comment section on any kind of video, on any social media platform for any level of respect or dignity. That is not the place that ever shows up, hardly ever. Very rarely, every once in a while. And like on opera videos, every once in a while, musical theater and opera videos, I see like really awesome comments, but like it's pretty rare.
Now, is it not more dehumanizing to center your own outrage about how he said that than it is to actually sit with the experiences of families for which those statements are absolutely true?
It's not dehumanizing to be upset at someone in a position of power spouting and mirroring historical rhetoric that led to forced sterilizations, forced institutionalizations, eugenics. It's totally fair for people to get online and want to sound an alarm and say, red flags, people, this is not good. This is not a good way to look at this. This is not a productive discussion. Let's not engage with genocidal rhetoric. Let's call out the dehumanization for what it is and how dangerous it is. And then let's have an actual productive discussion about best practices when it comes to biopsychosocial care.
Level 2 autism with an intellectual disability. My daughter was born an extremely gorgeous, smart, and very healthy little girl. She was typically developing and even started talking by the time she was 12 months old. Then she was nonverbal for almost 7 years.
Okay, slight little SLP education moment. We expect first words between 7 and 12 months. By 12 months, what we actually expect for speaking children is combining 2 words together and starting to make phrases. They should have an expressive vocabulary of about 50 words by 12 months. So if she was just starting to talk at 12 months, that would actually be a slight speech delay, actually. A slight delay in the use of expressive words. Maybe not enough to be super concerning. You'd have to be fully assessed to know for sure. So first off, there is that. Second off, this is along with these more significant support needs. Autistics are more at risk of abuse and neglect, that lady said, which is very true, 100% true. And that is true for children, neurodivergents across the board who have more significant support needs. They all are at a higher risk of abuse and neglect. And I will also say, as a speech therapist, non-speakers are a very high risk of abuse and neglect because people assume they can't tell you what's happening. I believe I put this in one of my videos, but maybe I need to revisit it and do another video. But I definitely have like a blog post about it, which is on my website, which is about how it is. I think in my field, it's one of the ways my field has kind of failed non-speaking children is in the fact that we often do not start with providing clear guidance on how to tell someone when you're being mistreated and not giving them access to that language on like an AAC device, for example, to be able to tell someone they are being mistreated either at school or in the home or by friends at a park or wherever they are. All children need access to language that helps them to explain that to people. And non-speakers, it's usually not even thought of as something to teach them, which I think is atrocious. And I think that is an area that our field specifically has sort of failed in because we tend to be the frontline people providing the language and the communication device. It's a whole separate thing talking about ABA people who want to encroach on that, but that is our scope of practice. That is not their scope of practice, identifying the appropriate communication device for someone. Not ABA scope of practice. It's ours. There's also issues with non-speakers, though, when it comes to abuse and neglect. There are non-speakers that I follow on places like Tumblr, for example, who they post on there all kinds of things about their experiences growing up, even if they had access to AAC. They talk about things like people taking AAC devices away when they're perceived to be perseverating by hitting, a selection over and over and over again, and the parent gets annoyed, and so they take the device away or they mute the voice. And it's like, that also is something you wouldn't do to a speaking child. That is the equivalent of putting a piece of duct tape over someone's mouth. And if you wouldn't do it to a speaking child, you really shouldn't do it to a non-speaking child. And so sometimes that neglect, there's overt abuse and neglect, yes, but sometimes it's that implicit type of like, it comes from that societal stigma where people just assume that they don't know what's being said about them, and they assume that they don't know what they're trying to say, and they take away their voice. They don't give them the right access to having a voice, to being able to communicate very well, effectively, like with an expressive language modality. that really works for them in the ideal way. And when they are attaining that modality, the modality is taken away from them sometimes if it's not being used in a way someone likes. They try to tell people about mistreatment and then they get ignored. People just assume they did that. Surely that's not what they mean, you know? And then also the other piece that I want to bring up is sort of like what this lady just said. It's that she was born beautiful, smart, and then, you know, she said her daughter has an intellectual disability. That doesn't mean she can't understand you. All parents out there, if you have a non-speaking child, if you have a child with ID, it doesn't mean they can't understand. And maybe they don't understand all the words. Maybe she can't define the word gorgeous or use the word gorgeous. But that vibe of you used to be so awesome and now, kids with ID can pick up on that. They understand that vibe. Okay? Non-speakers understand that vibe. So many non-speakers go through their childhood hearing people talk about them, and they know the adults are assuming they didn't understand anything, but they are there to hear people say, why are we even bothering to teach them math? It's not like they can understand anything. Why do they even come to school? This is so stupid. They can't learn anything. They hear that. And I've heard staff members talk about kids with the kids sitting right there saying things like that with each other. Like, it happens. It happens in classrooms. It happens in homes. And when you talk about abuse and neglect, you don't have to have a disability, an intellectual disability or autism to be hurt by the feeling that you get knowing that your parent sees you as a disappointment or as a burden. One of the biggest things about this rhetoric, like, I think a lot of this rhetoric comes from the social hierarchy that we're all just like conditioned to believe in. I think that's where you get these stats of like who's more deserving of support and who deserves financial support, who's useful to society, right? We get that from that social hierarchy. And I think that a lot of us have normalized that hierarchy to the point where it feels very natural to have the debate of who's more disabled, who should have the platform, who should speak the most, right? And I don't think it's the most productive discussion. If you follow the logic to its conclusion, what if we do find the one family in the United States that is dealing with the most adversity, that has the most high support needs, kid or maybe multiple kids, right? What if we find that family? Then what? Then what? Are they the ones who get to determine who is deserving of supports? Like, after they get all the supports they need, do they then get to determine it? Or is it just like everybody line up behind them and we'll just judge who gets access to supports based off of like how disabled, like how, what, you know what I mean? Like, it's just not very functional, right? It's not very useful. And I think ultimately the reality is when anybody with any level of disability, whether autistic or not, if you have high support needs that are medical, the main issue is the money, right? The reason people debate that stuff, the reason why people like RFK Jr. probably want to believe in a cure and stuff is because adequately supporting these people requires money. And that's what the companies don't want to do. Insurance companies, governmental medicine, like Medicaid type systems, they don't want to spend the money. That's really what it comes down to. So they want to sum up human life in the amount of people who are paying taxes. That's what they want to do, right? And so I think the more productive way of going about things is to deny them that debate, right? Let's cut them off at the knees. Let's say no more dehumanizing rhetoric, none of this, okay? No more of this, I'm going to reject scientific consensus. No more of this, I'm not going to listen to experts. I only listen to anecdotal evidence. None of that. No more of this, the world was better back when, and we should reinstate labor farms and institutions for people. No more of this like rhetoric of we should go backwards, okay? and more of the rhetoric of like, what can we do under the biopsychosocial model? What is the best practice? What should we do? And then also, let's like pressure the companies, pressure the government to pay for it. The numbers might seem large, but they're not that large in the grand scope of a governmental budget. They are really not that big, okay? I know it looks like a lot of zeros, but it really isn't compared to other spending in governments, right? The ideal amount would still be a drop in the bucket for medical insurance companies and for the government. So that's the reality, right? And the reason a lot of people won't want to get behind that reality of spending the money on those people is because of that hierarchical, but you have to do something to deserve it, right? That's what's so unproductive about this. Who deserves the support? That's the question. And that's not a productive question. It's a very dehumanizing question. And if we follow the pattern of history, and if we follow the logical conclusion to that question, it becomes a very dangerous application for a lot of people. And it excludes a lot more people from support and help than it would ever begin to help. So that's my main conclusion there. Also, classic Gen Z of, yeah, I think sometimes people really do need to touch more grass and just get off the algorithms a bit more. If anything I said that is helpful, drop a comment below. If you have anything to add, drop a comment below. Let me know what your thoughts are on things. If you've liked this, please do give it a thumbs up, all that sort of stuff. I'm really bad at I'm trying to get better at telling people to do those sort of things and let the algorithm know I exist. And if you think other people need to know that I exist, then then interact with the video somehow, right? Thanks for watching this far, and I always like to finish off as someone who's reclaiming the word weird for myself, in the spirit of using our weirdness for good to create a safe community and more connection with each other. I wish for you all to just keep it weird, and until next time, bye guys.